We left London on day one and changed trains in Paris for the overnight express to Barcelona. We were to have 3 days in the Catalonian capital city. The last time I had been in Barcelona was 1960, and naturally it had changed. The traffic was just the same, and so was the glorious sunshine. By the waterfront and harbour, many of the older, attractive buildings were still there, but newer ones were in evidence. The famous Christopher Columbus column was still there. With him standing on the top, pointing to the west. The port of Barcelona, the busy waterfront, and the harbour have all changed. Now known as Olympic Port, the main traffic are large cruise liners. Close by, a large marina is home to hundreds of yachts and luxury cruisers. The most famous landmark in Barcelona is of course the Sagrada Familia church. Work started in 1882 and is still going on. Designed by Gaudi, it is an extraordinary structure and is not due to be completed until 2030. Inside, it is even more extraordinary, with a multitude of columns rising high up to finish in the fantastic shapes and designs. People come from around the world to gaze in amazement at this strange building. All around is the sound of builders working to complete this extraordinary building. Some parts are nearly finished. This beautiful window, for instance. Another of Gaudi's creations is the Parc Güell. This fearsome but colourful dragon is quite happy to have a pretty girl sitting on him. These are Gaudi's houses, now museums. He seemed to be obsessed with dragons. One place we all wanted to see was the Olympic Stadium, built for the 1992 Olympic Games. This is the main entrance, a sort of triumphal arch, surmounted by the Catalonian coat of arms and clock. The seating capacity was reduced after the games, so it looked smaller now than when the brilliant opening and closing ceremonies were held here, with Plácido Domingo and Montserrat Caballé filling the night with glorious singing. The stadium is constantly in use, with regular athletic meetings and football matches. This is where the athletes battled it out during the games to win or lose a coveted Olympic medal. These near-vertical jagged rocks are known in the Catalan dialect as Montserrat, and on the top is the famous Monastery of Montserrat, A short coach trip had brought us here to see it, although why build it right up there seems very strange. A funicular railway took us up the last part. It was very impressive and so peaceful, which must explain why it was built there.
That's it.
The monastery buildings were dwarfed by the massive rocks towering above. Away from the burning sunshine, there were peaceful corridors to shelter, as was the small square in the shadow of the outside wall of the basilica. If you wanted to, you could continue on the funicular railway a short distance to the very top. From up here there were the most stunning views. But looking down on the monastery was quite spectacular. After a few minutes it was time to go down again. And we said goodbye to the monastery at Montserrat. It really had been a most interesting visit. In the evening we were taken to a dream-like restaurant called the Cantrevinu, an idyllic 17th century farmhouse. We had a sumptuous meal with wonderful wine. It was a perfect end to a superb day. The next day we went on to Madrid by train. Time waits for no man, and we were quickly ushered on board a very modern high-speed train. This was effortless, high-speed transport, very comfortable, air-conditioned and fast. A readout in the carriage gave us the outside temperature and our speed, 298 kilometers per hour, which is 186 miles per hour. At times the train reached 195 miles per hour. In only 3 hours we arrived at Spain's capital city. It was then by coach for a tour of the city. Once again the weather was perfect and we drove past many of Madrid's most impressive buildings. Here's the famous Prado Museum and Art Gallery with the statue of Goya. We were then taken to see an unusual sight, an ancient Egyptian temple rescued from the Aswan Dam. This is the Temple of Debod, reconstructed to look as it was built 3,000 years ago. Next was the Royal Palace, a magnificent building with the Spanish flag proudly fluttering in the breeze from the rooftops. This interesting wall mural led us to one of the highlights of our visit. Yes, you've guessed it, Madrid's Plaza del Toros, the Las Ventas bullring. It was constructed in 1929 with a strong Moorish influence, and it is the centre of excellence for the bullfighting mad people of Madrid. If you get to fight a bull here, you have arrived. They hold bullfights every week, and the top matadors are held in the very highest esteem, and are also very rich. At each bullfight, 6 bulls are killed. Over a year, that's a lot of bull. Once inside, a guide gave us all the details, first in Spanish and then thankfully in English. The bullring holds 15,000 people, with the expensive seats at the top, under cover and in the shade. The Las Ventas bullring has both a presidential box as well as a royal box. It was very hot in the sun, and the clock confirmed that Englishmen do go out in the midday sun. The next day was a coach trip to Toledo, in the Middle Ages, the capital city of Spain. We travelled through typical countryside of the region, which was very enjoyable in its own right, before arriving at Toledo. Our driver took a road which gave us a wonderful view of the city. Our guide today had an imposing manner and quite a loud voice. The Spanish Civil War was his speciality, and we were well educated in the subject.
By the Germans and Italians, and the loyalists, the Republicans, were, by the way, pretty ill-organized style. It's the first, particularly the gate. Have a look at the gate.
We were taken inside this imposing palace with its stairway and quite remarkable brickwork. We were told the ceiling above us was the original 13th century carving.
Now it looks like Charles IV. Charles IV with this
There were some very interesting carvings and designs on the wall made out of tiles, which the Moorish people were really very, very accomplished at. The next building to visit in Toledo was inevitably the cathedral, and very, very impressive it was too. With an entrance gate like this, it's got to be an important place. Looking at these magnificent buildings, one can only wonder about the time and effort it took for craftsmen and builders in days gone by to create such a masterpiece. Inside, the most magnificent organ created a perfect background to some of the treasures that are housed in the cathedral. These are priceless relics from hundreds of years ago and are taken out once a year for a procession through the city to commemorate one of the saints.
And then, of course, remember that for some 200 and something years, Belgium and Spain, because Belgium was Spain, boom, yeah, all of them. It's particularly the most dangerous way, but they don't it's completely different, because those images, or this monstrance, is carried by a obviously, we're talking about some rare universities in Spain were created by the Cathedral University. The cross, it's the Titian. Titian was Charles the Imagine.
Outside in the sunshine again, our guide was still doing his stuff. Toledo was once the centre for sword making in Europe. The craftsmen of the day had managed to perfect the art of producing steel that would remain sharp and strong and not break in a fight. As expected, there were shops selling hundreds of different swords. Obviously all replicas, but nevertheless a tradition being carried through from previous days. And look at the workmanship on the hilt of that one. It was wonderful to just amble around these historic roads and streets in such glorious weather, and to look at some of the ancient walls and gateways that still exist and are in very good repair from many years ago. Some with the coat of arms built in stonework. Many sections of the ancient walls of the city are still there. Climbing up to a high point, one had a wonderful view of the surrounding countryside. And then it was back in the coach, and once again the driver took us on the opposite side of the city by the river, where we could see some of the wonderful bridges which crossed the River Teu, and the river itself winding its way around the edge of the city. It really was a wonderful sight. The city dates back to around the 2nd century, with the Romans followed by countless others, Moors and finally Spanish. Full of history and an absolute joy to visit. We then stopped at a viewing point where we were afforded a wonderful panoramic view of the entire city. On a beautiful day like today, it really was a memory to treasure. The next day we were going on another visit and to another historical city. Time and tide waits for no man or for our group, and we climbed aboard our comfortable coach. Once again the weather was perfect as we rolled along through gently undulating, almost desert-like terrain before coming to more greener countryside. We were now near to our destination, Segovia. Our coach dropped us off at the city's most famous landmark, the magnificent Roman aqueduct. Constructed in the 1st century, it is 92 feet high, has 166 arches, and was built to bring water to the city from the Gadara Mountains 9 miles away. It was constructed without using mortar, just the weight of the stones holding it all together. We took a gentle stroll through the city. Segovia really is a beautiful place, virtually untouched by the passage of time.
But also he ordered the construction of
This is reputed to be the oldest house in Segovia. A curious activity here is the placing of models of people looking out of houses. The cathedral is, of course, one of the main buildings of the city. Our guide tries to explain things for us.
And the small village is the church. Here, the cathedral. We have this part of the village.
A short walk between the houses brought us to the main square, with its pleasant trees and welcome shade.
And now we have to come back the same way the aqueduct did. That was the place where Isabel the Catholic lived.
Leaving the square, we made our way to the castle, which dates back to the 11th century. Its massive entrance towers above everything else, whilst a very deep rocky defile drops away under the drawbridge. Curiously, a monastery is situated only a few hundred yards away. Then it was time to return to our coach and go back to Madrid. We checked out of our hotel in Madrid, and then it was in our coach again, this time bound for Salamanca. We were in for a big surprise this morning, as our coach took us to Avila. This is the wonderful old walled city of Avila, dating back to the 12th century, and the best preserved medieval city in Spain, completely enclosed by its famous walls. There are a total of 88 watchtowers built into the wall, positioned quite close together all the way round. It was here that the 1957 film The Pride and the Passion, set during the Napoleonic Wars, was made. This is how it reads in Spanish. The Spaniards use a massive cannon to knock down the walls of the French-held city. Here's Cary Grant lighting the blue touch paper. This is another time warp situation where one can forget the present and relive the past. The stunning gateways and fortifications are wonderfully preserved. It's almost as if you are fully expecting mounted soldiers to come riding by with breastplates and swords glinting and rattling in the sunshine. Rejoining the coach, we drove away with a last look at the walls of Avila. Our next destination, Salamanca, was not too far away, and we settled back to enjoy the drive before arriving there. Dating back to the 12th century, Salamanca is famous for its university, cathedral, and many historical buildings. Students came from all over Europe to study here during the Middle Ages. The cathedral dates back to the 15th century. Inside there is a viewing gallery right at the top of the nave, just under the roof. In 1792, An earthquake struck Lisbon, 300 miles away, but shockwaves caused considerable damage to Salamanca, including cracks in the wall of the cathedral, one of which can still be seen here. The university still has the original library, which is full of priceless books, and a beautiful chapel, which is in regular use, especially for weddings. We then went on to one of the gems of the city, the Plaza Mayor. Our guide explains it all.
Main square. The works on the square started by this facade way. To cross eyes, they were much more discreet than today.
This is the largest square in Europe, and one of the most attractive. Around the square there are a number of columns, and the people of Salamanca decided to erect plaques on each column. And you can see above each of the columns is a plaque commemorating the good and the great of Salamanca. One is of the Duke of Wellington, who is a hero here for ridding the city of the French after the Battle of Salamanca in 1812. Just outside the square is a statue of the designer of the square. A nice touch. As evening falls, the Plaza Mayor takes on a different scene, ideal for relaxing and enjoying a few drinks after dinner. The following morning we set off by train for the 6-hour journey to our last destination, San Sebastian. This had been a wonderful vacation in Spain, and this time we were going to the seaside and on the Atlantic coast, situated in the northwest part of the country. We were going to stay at the very prestigious Hotel Londres y Inglaterra, quite a place, and ideally situated right on the front. Looking at this beautiful beach, one can understand why San Sebastian is such a favourite with holidaymakers. Although today was rather dull and gloomy compared with the beautiful sunshine we'd had previous days, it was very pleasant just to stroll around, to view the old part of the town, the old harbour, with its wonderful yachting marina and a sort of main line or main road in the middle, which is rather interesting. And the old town itself was fascinating. There is, of course, a cathedral church with all the usual ornate carvings, which is very attractive. The doorway in particular caught my eye. The carvings and stonework all surrounded a rather attractive wooden door. As in all Spanish towns and cities, it has a main square, and San Sebastian has quite an attractive one. Surrounded by columns, nice shade to walk through when it's blazing hot. But it was the main streets that really are the place to be. Absolutely bustling with energy, with bars and shops just about everywhere. I wouldn't like to mess with him on a dark night. There were shops selling just about everything. Bars preparing food, hams hanging up or hanging down. Everywhere, people just eating or drinking. A tremendous selection of food. Some of the bars very modern looking, some just ordinary. And one where a pretty girl danced for me. Although the sun was not out and it was rather gloomy, it was still very warm, and people were out in their hundreds, just ambling around or having tea or an ice cream or something similar. They had some rather strange animals standing around. In 1813, one of the last towns in Spain to be held by the French was San Sebastian. This memorial commemorates the British who relieved the town eventually. Close to the impressive municipal building was a budding Placido Domingo, who I think has missed the boat. A case of don't ring us, we'll ring you. As the afternoon wore on, the sun blessed us with its presence, although rather weakly, and highlighted these very attractive gardens, complete with palm trees, of course, and the usual dogs, and the kiddies roundabout. High above the town stood the inevitable statue of our Lord, overlooking and keeping an eye on everyone. But soon it was time to go back to the hotel, and I passed by the marina again. Onto the front, and there was some sort of yacht race going on, which was rather interesting. And the lovely beach had a few people on it. Not a lot, but a few. It was not long before I found some interesting photogenic studies. Aren't they lovely? Dragging myself away rather reluctantly, I went back to the hotel. It had a very pleasant lounge area with lots of paintings and model ships, all beautifully cased. Having built a few myself, this was quite interesting. It also supported a veranda bar looking out onto the Atlantic. As always, we are up against the clock, and it was time to leave San Sebastian. I took a last look at this glorious beach, and although dull, it was still very, very impressive. The next day, day 12, we were due to leave San Sebastian, catch the train to Hendaye, and then on to Paris, and then London. The holiday was over.